Hi, I'm Alex Howards, and welcome to this week's episode of In Therapy, real life therapy sessions as they happen. In this week's episode, we're going to be exploring boundaries, particularly with family members, and why it's important to forgive, but not necessarily forget the past. Stay tuned till the end for my top tip on how to establish healthy boundaries. And if you haven't already, please like, subscribe, click the bell icon to be notified as new episodes are released. And please do subscribe to my other social channels for daily inspiration and support. In this week's episode, we catch up with Katie, who has been going through some major life changes with children leaving home and a breakdown of her marriage. Last time, despite Katie having made great progress, a series of challenging family dynamics had once again triggered a state of overwhelm and left Katie feeling powerless. How are you doing?
I'm okay. I've been doing. I went away actually on last Friday for a few days, just because I just had a pretty awful week,
Sure.
and so I just decided to go down where my parents live actually.
Good for you, and good for you for taking care of yourself as well, and actually going, what do I need? What I need is to get away from the sort of day-to-day
Oh,
of things.
I really did, and actually, I mean, my dad was quite tricky as he always is, but my mum was. It was the last two times I've seen her. Because my relationship with them has always been very tricky. The last two times I've seen her, we've just had such a laugh, and we've really got on well. And she's been making a massive effort. I've been making a massive effort. And
Why do you think it's different? What do you think's been the catalyst for both of you sort of meeting it from a different place?
well, I think there's two things actually. One is that she and I have both had a lot of time to reflect on the family dynamics.
Yeah.
In fact, there's three things probably. Two is the letter that I wrote was very, non-judgmental. It was about where I'm at in my journey, and that's and just laying down some ground rules, I suppose.
Yeah. And it sounds like it softened something in you in the writing process, but it also softened something in her by the sounds of it.
Yeah, so we spoke about that letter, and she said, when we read it, we just thought, God, we've been terrible parents, haven't we? And I said, no, and so then we had this dialogue, and I said, no, I spent all my life telling them what terrible parents they've been. And now this weekend I was telling them, no, you haven't been that terrible. Because I think when you're able to see or understand why, I actually said to my mum this weekend, I know, and I do genuinely know this, I know you did the best you could with what you had.
Yes. But there wasn't an absence of love. There was an absence of resources, an absence of skills, and an absence of capacity to meet the needs that were there. But at the core, it's not an absence of love. It's just a whole set of other things that get in the way of that.
I think, yeah. And when you say that, I sometimes think, oh, some of the things that I did, you wouldn't think you'd treat somebody you loved like that. But she said, so I'll just give you my sister, this is the third thing I think has got a lot to do with everything. When we were growing up, we were kind of encouraged to be very competitive with each other. And I think we were competing for love with our parents. I think there was a lot of competition. There wasn't enough to go around. And we were
so there was a limit of resource that the three of you were fighting for by the sounds of it.
Totally. And it was encouraged as well. It was a very...
Give me an example.
Well, I'll give you an example of what happened this weekend that can directly translate to what happened when I was a kid. So my son, my parents have got a rowing machine, and my son is an elite rugby player. So he does a lot of training. So he was doing a lot of rowing this weekend. Not even so much training, just because he likes working out. And he came down and he said, I just did 1K in 3 minutes 33. And my dad went, no, you didn't. So he gets his phone and he's like, well, the Olympic record is whatever it is. So it's not very good, is it? And that is how that. So I said, you will never be good enough. If you got 9.5 out of 10 in the test, if somebody else got 10, then it was rubbish.
Do you think it's a way of trying to motivate people?
Yeah, I don't know. It's a perfectionist. I think it's a perfectionist thing that he.
It also helps us understand why you have such a vicious, strong inner critic, right?
Yeah.
Like relentless, sort of constant undermining, attacking, criticizing, beating up, because that you normalize to that in the environment.
Yeah. And then seeing him do it to my own kids, I was like, I feel very protective of him.
Yeah, sure. But it's also hard for your dad, I imagine, because if you were to challenge him, it'd be very hard for him probably to even see it, because he's probably so normalized to treating people and speaking in that way that it's not a behavior, it's just how he is.
And I think he treats himself in the same way.
I'm sure.
So that happened. And then my sister is, she is turning 50 on Thursday. And I've been in contact with her for the last few months. And but it's always very on and off with my sister. And anyway, she was trying to arrange a birthday do for Thursday. And then I had this thought, which I thought was a lovely idea, but to book a Zoom call and try and get all her friends on this Zoom call to congregate and say happy birthday to her on Thursday while we would have been in her garden. Anyway, as last week progressed, she was getting more and more bitter and angry and shirty with me and my mum, actually, and just almost like spoiling for an argument. And anyway, the night I got there, which was a Friday night, she phoned my mum. She said, right, I'm cancelling my birthday. Everything's off. Anyway, then she didn't make any contact at all over the weekend. And I know I know how these things play out. Well, I shouldn't have done what I did last night, but I thought I'm just going to, because the narrative has always been in the past. It'll all turn around. It'll all be my fault, and the whole family will turn against me, and I'll be pariahed and outcast. And that's the fear.
Right.
And that has happened.
Yeah.
On many occasions in the past. The last time it happened 2 years ago to the day almost was she got upset about something and she blamed me, and I wasn't even here. And it still ended up in the long term being all my fault, and I was the one who was outcast. And that's just being a scapegoat, that's what happens. And so yesterday I thought, I'm not going to allow that to happen. I'm going to, everything I've done has come from a place of love. I did it with no other motivation than for her to have a lovely time. So I phoned her last night and I said, I hope you've had a really nice weekend. And, and I know that they'd been driving around looking at unis together. I said, did you like the unis? And it was all very, very curt responses and monosyllabic. So I just said to her, you seem a bit short with me. Is everything okay? And she said, and then literally I just got a diatribe that I'd ruined her birthday, that it was all my fault, that she, that I had got how dare I be invited to something and then take over and organise a surprise. I said, I just organised for your friends to dial into a Zoom call to say happy birthday to you. I think that would have been a nice. She said, well, that would have been my worst nightmare. She goes, luckily, I've got friends who understand exactly what you're like, and they're all supporting me. And I was just like, oh my God. And it really, really was like daggers through my heart. And then she sent me a whole diatribe of texts saying, that I'm a nasty piece of work, and so it upsets me, And so I actually phoned my mum because I'd just left, and I said, this is what I've just had. And the fear that, my sister will convince my mum and dad, not even convinced, but it'll all turn around eventually that it is all my fault. And I said to my mum, I'm not even that wounded by this particular incident. It's just stirred up a lot of trauma.
Well, the history, yeah.
And that's what I feel, when I talk about it, even a lot of trauma from the past, so many times when I've literally been outcast because, and I have behaved badly in the past. I'm not saying I've been an angel, because I haven't. There have been times, but on this particular occasion, I know there was no ulterior motive. There was no agenda. It was purely from a place of love and kindness. And I know that 100%. Now, I'm not saying that's always been the case. Sometimes, as I say, we were brought up in a very competitive environment, and sometimes there have been motive to my behaviour, and I'm not proud of that, but I've owned it, and I've tried to do something about it. But on this occasion, it was purely just to try and do something nice for somebody else.
And it sounds like there's a few different pieces here, right? There's the trauma or the emotional shock of what happened, and just letting yourself feel that, metabolize that process, and sort of digest the impact of that. But it's also figuring out in future how you have kind of the necessary boundaries to be able to feel safe in these situations. Because it's like, the more, I'm all for forgiving the past, but that isn't the same as forgetting the past.
No.
One of the things that I think happens is that people work very hard on forgiving and sort of letting go. And the problem is they forget that just because they're changing, it doesn't mean the other person's necessarily changed. So they end up getting re-traumatized almost from a more sensitive or more vulnerable place. And I think it was certain people in our lives, and often it's family members, because they're the people that we have the biggest triggers and the biggest history with. Having healthy boundaries can be really important, and sort of figuring out what's the safe kind of optimum proximity emotionally with that person. And some people, it might be being completely emotionally vulnerable and open and intimate with them. Others, it might be being really quite emotionally guarded and defended and distanced. And that's not a sign of dysfunction. That's a sign of healthy relating and taking care of oneself emotionally, because then we're less vulnerable to the sort of outbursts and the behavior of the other, because our heart isn't tender and open and vulnerable. It's appropriately guarded.
And I just think, for me, and I know that that's how I have to be, but I find for me, because I am such like an open and transparent, and what you see is what you get, heart on my sleeve kind of person, and I've always been like that. I find it difficult to be guarded with anybody, because that's who I am. And
it's
it's genuine.
You want to be in connection, right? You want
yeah.
to feel good.
But I think the fear is, I'm happy not to be in contact with my sister, if that's what she wants, fair enough. But the fear is that she then, has this, she's off, doing gallivanting with my parents and doing lovely things. And I feel like an outcast.
Well, in some ways, it's easier if someone's addiction is, alcohol or drugs, for example, because they can just stop. Someone's addiction is food. It's much more difficult, because they still need to eat, and then how to do that in a kind of controlled way. Same thing is true having boundaries with people that are still part of our lives. It's one thing if you can just cut someone off and just go, I'm just not, that person just doesn't belong in my life. But when you can't do that, it is more challenging. And it's like,
well, and also I think my sister is addicted to control, and this is what it's all about.
Yeah. And so the relationship works, quote unquote, better when it's, let me get this right way around, when it's dysfunctionally functional, I think is what I'm trying to say. When it's like, if she's controlling and you're allowing yourself to be controlled, then it sort of works. But as you start to come back into your power, so actually, it's not okay to talk to me that way, and actually that behavior is not okay, then it starts to shake up the dynamics of the whole relationship. And I talk about a sort of dance of change, that if you're in a dynamic with somebody and you're sort of dancing a dance together, if you change the dance, they've got one of three choices. They're either going to try and pull you back into the old dance or the old behavior, or they're going to come with you in the new direction, or you're going to have to dance separate dances. And what's happening, I think, at the moment is you're starting to come more into your power and more into your awareness of your needs and what you need. So you're starting to change that dance. It maybe that's causing her behavior to escalate, to try and pull you back into the familiar dynamic where she feels safe and she feels comfortable.
Where I'm the scapegoat and she's in control. Right. And I actually did. I did hesitate before I did this, but I did explain to my mum the fear I was feeling. And my mum said to me, because I literally have had a lovely 2 days with my mum, and I said to her, I'm terrified that I'm just going to end up being pariahed, and I'm going to be scapegoated. And my mum said to me, I understand that fear, Katie, and I'm really sorry for any part I have played in doing that in the past. And I promise you, I won't let that happen this time.
I feel to hear that from your mum.
Oh, well, it feels good, but there's a part of me that doesn't trust it.
And do you think that part of you not trusting it is a kind of healthy skepticism, or do you think that's just responding from a traumatized place?
I'm not sure. I really want to believe what she's saying, but there's some part of me that's saying just be bloody careful. Yeah.
So maybe it's the way to respond to it is it's a lovely thing to hear, and trust is something that's earned, not just freely granted. And I think to me, that's a very important dynamic in relationships, that we shouldn't just freely give people our trust, particularly when we've been traumatized, and particularly when those people have been part of that trauma. Trust is something that is earned through someone's actions. So it's lovely to hear your mum say that, but you need to go through a few iterations of this dynamic to see how she responds. And if she responds in the way that she says that she will, that could be a very powerful healing for you.
Yeah. She phoned this morning to see if I was okay, and because I'm so paranoid, I said, "Have you spoken to my sister?" I said her name. Have you spoken to her? And she said, "Oh yes, I had a quick chat with her this morning," and I was like, "Oh." And part of me just thinks, well. And she said, I said, "Was there any tension or any?" Because she was cross with my parents initially. She was just trying to find a reason to, kick off. And I said, "Was there any?" No, not really. And that I'm just thinking, well, hang on a minute.
But you have to be careful of the little girl in you that, a bit like you, as kids, you were forced to compete for attention. You have to be careful of the little girl that is saying, well, if my mum's talking to my sister, she's betraying me. When actually your mum can be supporting you and on your side and still have her relationship with your sister. Those two things aren't mutually exclusive. As much as the little girl wants mummy to herself and wants to feel like she's only on my.
Well, it's almost like as a mother, I think if one of my daughters had treated the other one like that, I'd have something to say about it. Maybe whether that's right or wrong.
Well, you might have something to say about it, but you would still try and see it from both perspectives, right? Even if I think there's an objective right and wrong, right? So my point here is not that listening to your sister's side means that somehow that you're wrong in your perception. There's an objective right and wrong, but there's also subjective experience. So your sister has an experience that doesn't mean that it doesn't change the facts of the situation, but just for your mum, as a mother, she's in a sort of impossible position there if the only way for you to feel loved is if she takes your side over your sister.
But it's all weekend she's been, when she heard what had happened, she was saying that's just not on, that's awful what she's done. And my sister's been pretty rude and aggressive towards them as well this week. And so, and that, I think that's what, and then, but I'm not, and yeah, I'm being controlling and manipulative, I suppose, trying to get her to just see my point of view. But
no, you want to be seen by your mum. That doesn't mean you're being manipulative. You want to be seen by your mum.
I just want people to understand that I'm not. I think it's like, I'm not a bad person. I didn't do anything wrong here. And the fear of being, of the injustice of being blamed for something that, and that has happened so many times in the past. So many times I can't even count.
How are you doing with seeing and validating your feelings? Because that's ultimately, of course, the piece that matters the most.
I recognise, that I'm powerless over anybody else and their behaviour, and I have to accept that hurt people, And I know she's not in a great place, but I'm the first person who's there to support her always. I will support her, and I still would, even after this has happened, I would. But she won't accept she's got the problem. She needs me to be the problem.
Yes. And that's where the boundaries become so important.
Yeah.
Right? And that's where also, ultimately, it's you being there for you. It's you allowing these feelings and these emotions to be felt and to be seen and to be heard, which I hear is part of what's been happening.
Yeah. And I know that the boundary is the thing I've got to do. I do find that very, very difficult.
Well,
and also for me myself, not to buy in to her narrative about me.
Yes.
I find that really difficult to say, actually, no, that's not true. I'm not a nasty person. You know, as I say, I know I've done nasty things in the past. I have. You know, I know I've behaved inappropriately in the past. I have. But I've taken huge strides and I've made huge efforts to address those issues and to become the best person, the best version of myself that I possibly can. And I know that deep down, fundamentally, you know, I've done those things from a place of pain in the past, and I'm sorry for all the pain and hurt I've caused, and I've done that work, but I can't keep being a punch bag
Right.
for people who haven't done that work and who won't accept that they've got issues. I can't, but I don't know how not to, if you know what I mean, because
Yes.
I seem to like constantly. The only way I know how to is to cut off all contact, and I don't want to do that.
Yes. A big part of this is really working on your connection to and your relationship with yourself, because the
Yeah,
more you're self-referencing your self-worth and how you feel, the less vulnerable you are to everyone else's perceptions and stories and opinions about you. Part of the boundaries is again building up that self-worth and that self-love in such a way that you're like, that's just not okay. And it's not like in a massive explosion reaction, because the more we metabolize and process the trauma, the less that's sort of leaping out each time that we get triggered. But it's just being really clear that actually it's not okay. And it might mean you don't walk away from the relationship completely, but you do walk away from the conversation, right?
and
So
I
one
did
can
last
walk away
night
in the
when
one.
she was on her, like she was on her complete, like she was on one, and I didn't even know. I mean, she was just literally like with verbal diarrhea, and I just said, I don't think what you're saying is hurting my feelings, and I don't want to hear this anymore because I don't think I don't think I deserve it. So I'm going to end this conversation
Good.
now. So I did,
Well done.
and I said goodbye, and I put the phone down. But then I just got like a diatribe of text,
And
bing,
that's
bing,
what, and
bing,
that's
bing.
where you just block the number for 24 hours, right? You just, or
Yeah,
whatever that looks like. But it's loving yourself enough that you stand up for and you defend and you advocate for yourself. And, saying yes to you sometimes means saying no to other people and saying that's just not okay for me. And if that's how you're going to speak to me, I'm going to walk away from this situation.
yeah, and I did, and I've just walked to the post office today, and I put her present and her card in the post, and I've done, I'd bought her a present and a card, so I've put it in the post, and I've wished her a happy birthday, and then that's it,
Walk away from it. Yeah.
for now. And I'll wait for her to. Well, she'll never ever come back and apologise. So I'll accept the apology I'm never going to get.
Yeah.
At this stage.
And I think it's remembering next time that as much as you might want closeness and connection, it's remembering how these dynamics tend to play out with her. And so it's keeping appropriate proximity, both in terms of time and contact, but also emotional openness, because what often makes us more vulnerable is that longing for connection and wanting to do a lovely thing and wanting a nice
Yeah.
outcome from that. And,
Yeah.
and sometimes it's healthier to take a few steps back and just sort of ground in your body and go, I can feel the longing of that, but I recognize in my mind that's probably not how this is going to play out. So actually, I'm going to back off, and doesn't mean that you don't send a card and a present or whatever, but it's keeping an appropriate distance for that relationship at that chapter of that relationship, right? Because these relationships also evolve in different ways over time as well.
All right, that's lovely. Well, thank you, Alex. You've really helped me. Actually, I'm really glad we had this session today because I was really in turmoil last night. But I feel. Well, I did feel calm about it this morning, but I feel much calmer about it now. Actually, it's just nice to be heard, somebody to understand what I'm trying to get across.
Good. I'm so pleased to hear it, Katie, and well done again. You've really done great work these last few weeks. I'm so pleased to see it.
Thank you, and have a good week.
Thank you. Take care. Bye.
Bye.
I hope you found this week's episode of In Therapy helpful. I think we got into some really important themes this week. One of the real challenges when we're doing inner work is we start to feel different towards other people in our lives. That's a good thing. The world starts to look different. But we have to remember that just because we're changing, it doesn't necessarily mean that those we love are changing as well. And we can end up getting re-wounded, re-hurt by people by being too emotionally open in our hearts, or just spending too much time around relationships that can be toxic or can be difficult. Establishing healthy boundaries is really important. It takes courage. It's its own practice putting in place boundaries. But here's my top tip. Don't be afraid to walk away from a conversation or a situation for a moment. In the episode, Katie talked about how she ended a tricky phone call with her sister. And often it's better to walk away than to say things that we're only going to live to regret, or they're going to fuel that situation further. Often what causes us to stay in these difficult interactions is our inner critic. It's telling us that we mustn't walk away, that, that would be unloving or selfish or unkind. But often, long as it's done with a level of care, often leaving a fragmented or inflamed situation and using our tools of self-care to calm ourselves down, to come back to that discussion in a much more resourceful way, is not just an act of self-love towards ourselves, it's also an act of self-love towards others. It's almost being strong enough to protect them and us from the things that we might say that we don't really want to say. Boundaries is a practice. It takes time, it takes courage, but it also sometimes takes the willingness to do things that can feel uncomfortable in that moment. Also, just to let you know that we're opening registration on Thursday for the next intake of the Reset program. The Reset program is my 12-week online coaching program where we go really deep in how to reset and calm your nervous system. In the In Therapy episodes, you see me giving tips and ideas and practical pieces, but it's in the Reset program I really teach the tools and the techniques. And all of the participants of In Therapy go through the Reset program behind the scenes. So if you want to find out more, you can click the link in the description below the video. In next week's episode, we're going to be catching up with Katie again. There's been some quite big changes that have been happening in Katie's life. She's got a new job. She's exploring being back with her husband. There's a lot happening. Here's a taste of what's coming up next week. Katie, it's lovely to see you in person. How are you doing?
Simon, my husband, moved back in.
That's quite big news, Katie.
Do you know what? I can't even remember the conversation that we had, but it was basically, shall we give it another go? And
if you don't actively work at it, I almost guarantee you that within 6 to 12 months, it will be back where it was before.